"Our son has passed away. Aren't you going back to your parents' home? We'll be using this house from now on." Suddenly, my beloved husband was gone. Just after the funeral, it was my husband's parents who came to visit me, overwhelmed by sorrow. Though we didn't live together for a very long time, this house holds various memories of my husband. Why do I have to leave this house? But before I could even wipe my tears, my mother-in-law coldly informed me of this. "My name is Cheryl, and I work as an office clerk at a real estate company. I met my dear husband, Matthew, at the real estate company where I work. He was the brother of my colleague, and the two were very close. Since their workplace was nearby, he often visited. As a fellow office clerk, I also became close to that colleague who would later become my brother-in-law. That connection led him to introduce me to his real brother. As time passed, I started spending more time with them, such as having lunch together. Matthew and I got along well, and he made a good impression, but I didn't have romantic feelings at first. I thought he felt the same way until one day when our relationship changed. It was supposed to be a meetup at a restaurant reserved by my colleague, but he suddenly had urgent business and couldn't come. Not wanting to waste the reservation, I ended up spending time alone with Matthew for the first time. I later found out that this day had been planned by the brothers, with my future brother-in-law arranging for us to be alone at the request of his brother. As we enjoyed delicious food, our conversation flowed, and we shared our backgrounds and values, eventually realizing we had built a close relationship. Getting to know him more, I was drawn to his comforting smile. That day marked the beginning of a change in our relationship. And it didn't take long before we got married. It wouldn't have been possible without my brother-in-law's help, and I can't thank him enough for that. Then came the day I first met my parents-in-law. Filled with anxiety, they welcomed me very warmly. Their considerate conversation eased my nerves. "Thank you for coming. I'm so happy. I was looking forward to meeting you, Cheryl. I've prepared a lot of food so that today will be a wonderful day." As she said this, my mother-in-law kindly took care of me. My parents-in-law, like their eldest son, my husband, had a strong sense of independence and were very approachable. I was relieved and filled with gratitude for the enjoyable time spent at their home. Even after several meetings, my parents-in-law watched over our happiness, maintaining a good distance without putting pressure on us about marriage or children. Eventually, the topic of living together at their home came up, but we had plans to build our own house. Actually, my grandfather plans to leave his house to us. When I explained this, my parents-in-law listened seriously and nodded. To my grandfather, I was his only grandchild, and he adored me dearly, ultimately leaving me a beautifully renovated house and land. It seemed as if my grandfather had been waiting to finish the inheritance procedures before he passed away. The land soon underwent redevelopment, and because of its excellent location, the land value skyrocketed. However, with my years of experience in the real estate industry, I know that it's better to boldly sell it and build our ideal home rather than living there ourselves. Although I am grateful for my grandfather's love, I had heard that I was free to live in or sell the inherited house, so we were considering selling it. After we got married, we moved into that house. However, it was far from my workplace, and despite its excellent location, it was difficult to live there permanently. As we proceeded with considering the sale, an unexpected change occurred in our lives. My husband's company, where he works in sales, assigned him a transfer. The company is a large corporation with many branches nationwide. My husband was chosen because there was no other suitable candidate, and there was no option to decline. I'll definitely come back during the holidays. Also, to make sure you don't feel lonely, my parents will come to visit. If it's not too much trouble, could you take them out? Your parents are really nice people, so it would be fun to go out with them. However, the sale of the house might take a bit longer. Because of my job, my husband had to go on a solo assignment, and we had to cope with this sudden change. It was a sudden transfer, but I endured the loneliness of living alone, eagerly awaiting the day when I could live with my husband again. Just as my husband said, my parents-in-law often visited us on holidays. My mother-in-law, who had endured loneliness herself while caring for young children during her husband's business trips, especially understood my feelings of solitude. Memories with family can be made in any form. Let's go out together. If we enjoy shopping, it will brighten your spirits. Come on, Cheryl, let's go. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and it's delightful to see her enjoy our outings. Thanks to my mother-in-law's help, I've been able to spend my holidays busy instead of feeling lonely. However, concerns started to grow over time. On my days off, I almost always receive an invitation from my mother-in-law to go out. While that itself wasn't a problem, after a month, her invitations began to feel a bit forceful, ignoring my fatigue and our household circumstances. When I mentioned, I'd like to rest this week, my mother-in-law made a displeased face, as if I were complaining. But it's fun to go out together, isn't it? You don't dislike going out with me, do you? No, it's not that. But I thought you might be tired since you invite me every week. My mother-in-law looked sad. Even when I hurried to clear up the misunderstanding, she wouldn't listen at all. However, one day, she suddenly showed a bright smile, behaving as if she had forgotten all about our earlier conversation. I was confused but gladdened by it. In my mind, doubts about my mother-in-law's behavior grew stronger each day. The places she insisted on visiting were always shops with high expenses. The shopping at branded stores and meals at upscale restaurants continued, and I was always the one paying. Whenever it came to paying, my mother-in-law would always leave the store first. She never thanked me for the payments, nor did she ever offer to pay later. Of course, we have a house and sufficient salary, so I'm not worried about money. However, my husband and I have always been mindful of saving, and I didn't feel good about my mother-in-law's spending. When both of my parents-in-law were together, the situation was the same, if not worse. My father-in-law's presence only increased my financial burden. It was clear that this issue needed to be resolved, but discussing it with my husband was quite difficult. He had promised to definitely return during the holidays, but his new workplace was very busy, and he couldn't come home as often as he wanted. During a video call with my husband, his dark circles and gaunt face caught my attention. It was clear that he was exhausted from work. Feeling sorry to bring up the issue with my mother-in-law, I ended up pretending to be stronger than I felt. Your mother has been very kind to me. Matthew, take care of your health too. I'm fine, so don't worry. While hiding the situation from my husband, I continued to be unable to refuse the spending with my parents-in-law. However, their demands escalated, and when I finally said, I can't go out today, they made this suggestion. Why don't you lend us some money instead? What? I have to pay. Just a little bit, really just a bit. I've already booked the restaurant, but I'm going with a friend instead. Can you cover the part we're short? Unable to refuse, I reluctantly agreed and resigned myself to paying. However, I never showed this attitude to my husband. When I hinted to my mother-in-law, why don't you discuss it with Matthew, she surprisingly responded, it's embarrassing to talk to Matthew about such things. Thinking it shameful to ask her eldest son, She deemed it natural to rely on her daughter-in-law. I had given up on my mother-in-law's attitude, and being asked for money had become a routine matter. At least if I gave her some money as allowance, she would stop forcibly taking me out. I was aware that the problem was growing. However, interactions with my mother-in-law became more complicated, and I was mentally exhausted. Her behavior became increasingly incomprehensible and bizarre each day. She would arrive unannounced, and it felt like she was invading our privacy as she looked around the house, as if searching for valuable things. "Is this artwork something your grandfather left, Cheryl? It's lovely. With such fine antiques, you must be quite wealthy." Antique furniture selected by my grandfather remained in the house. My mother-in-law was captivated by them, visiting frequently to gaze at them obsessively and treating them as if they were her own. But this is our home, my husband's and mine. I finally decided to confide in my husband about my mother-in-law's behavior. I didn't know how he would react, but having his support to find a solution would be immensely comforting. My mother-in-law's actions were not pleasant, and regardless of being parents-in-law, intrusion into our private lives should not be tolerated. Around the same time, the duration of my husband's solo assignment was finalized. Just a little more patience until he returned. I hoped that once my husband returned, the financial demands from my parents-in-law would cease. A faint hope was rising in my heart. As my husband was working hard every day, I too had to endure just a little longer. I was looking forward to reuniting with him, but then a sudden incident occurred. What? Matthew collapsed and was taken to the hospital. My mind went blank. The call came from a colleague at my husband's place of assignment, and I rushed to the hospital immediately. Overwork had caused him to suddenly have a heart attack. Matthew was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. My always healthy and kind husband passed away suddenly from the attack and left us. Unable to accept this reality, I faced the funeral. The sense of loss was overwhelming, and I hardly remember anything. My brother-in-law rushed to help and took care of many arrangements on my behalf. "I'm sorry you just lost your brother too, and yet you're helping me so much." "It's my brother's funeral. Of course I'd help. Besides, are the land procedures okay? Is everything ready at home?" As we cleaned up after the funeral, I nodded and replied, "It's okay, everything is in order." A few days after my husband's funeral, my parents-in-law came to our house. However, it was clear they were not there to offer condolences. "Our son has suddenly passed away, and it's sad, but we're here for you. Don't worry." My mother-in-law was inexplicably smiling. Even more shockingly, she had arranged for a large truck, which was already loaded with furniture and belongings from her home. I was so surprised and confused at the moment that I couldn't say anything. This was clearly a move. Without any consultation, it seemed my parents-in-law intended to move into our house. Why would they take such an action? However, the reason became clear immediately. "Are you after our land?" In the midst of the confusion, a suspicion I had long harbored slipped out. My mother-in-law smirked coldly. "The land value has gone up considerably. I've had my eye on this house for a long time. In fact, we approved your marriage to my son because of this inheritance." Crushed by despair, I was at a loss for words. "So, you mean to say that you want to live with me here?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" my mother-in-law responded angrily, unable to hide her fury. Matthew's death was unexpected. In spite of that, my mother-in-law had been plotting to take over this house. My parents-in-law were trying to drive me out and claim this land as their own. and they had assumed I would leave the house voluntarily. Since our son has passed, aren't you going back to your parents' home? We will be using this house now. My mother-in-law smirked with a sinister smile. She gradually cornered my daughter and me towards the front door. Outside, it was pouring rain. In this cold, we wouldn't be able to endure being outside. Though I might manage, the idea of her doing such a cruel thing even to her own granddaughter terrified me. Still, I pointed out her mistake. Actually, the house has already been sold. It was difficult to restrain my laughter seeing the look on my mother-in-law's face, and a slight smile escaped me. My mother-in-law, shocked, exclaimed, "What?" At that moment, a truck from a completely different moving company arrived in front of the house. "Sorry, we've come for a delivery to this address." Due to the other moving company's truck stopping, muscular workers descended and approached us to verify the situation. Workers from the moving company hired by my mother-in-law also got out, and it was clear they sensed the confusion caused by the unexpected arrival of another truck. I demanded an explanation from my parents-in-law about what was happening, but both were too shaken to provide a coherent answer. Arguing in this situation wouldn't solve anything. Seeing them in such a state, I began to regain some composure. Then I gave clear instructions to move the truck. This house has already found a new owner, and the sale has been completed. The new residents are planning to move in, so you can't just put your things into someone else's house, can you? Amidst the movers' astonishment, a luxury car arrived. Out stepped a wealthy-looking couple with their children. In fact, I no longer owned this land. They were the new owners. My parents-in-law were even more disturbed, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Please move the truck quickly. The new residents' movers can't start their work." I managed to have the truck arranged by my mother-in-law moved, allowing the movers to begin their work and start bringing in the new furniture. My parents-in-law couldn't accept the situation and kept pressing me at the front door. During this time, the new homeowners, having had their family wait in the car, came over to confront the chaos. "Who are you exactly? This is the house we purchased. Please have the truck removed immediately." Caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of my parents-in-law, I scrambled to calm them. However, my parents-in-law didn't back down. They pushed past us and entered the house. Naturally, the interior was completely different, and none of the furniture we had used was left. My mother-in-law was shocked by the drastic changes and started causing a scene loudly. "What has happened here?" "The house is empty. My beloved antique furniture and lighting are gone. They were my favorites." "What is going on?" she yelled in confusion and rage. Then, the family planning to move in shouted, "We will call the police." Visibly shaken, my father-in-law decided to leave with my mother-in-law quickly. After giving them some space, my mother-in-law, though initially agitated, began to calm down and quieted. First, I apologized to the incoming family, providing them with my parents-in-law's names and addresses to prevent further trouble, achieving a temporary resolution. Although I felt overwhelmed by fatigue, I still needed to explain things to my parents-in-law. I returned to them and calmly informed them that the move had already been completed a few days before my husband passed away. I explained that the house had always been scheduled for sale, and everything proceeded as planned. While my husband was on his solo assignment, the plans had been put on hold, but everything resumed with the support of my brother-in-law. Confused by their demands for money and not wanting to worry my husband, I had kept everything to myself until my brother-in-law noticed and offered his help. He had revealed his own difficulties with the family, and had offered his help if needed. Wanting to maintain peace with both my husband and his family, I trusted my brother-in-law's discretion and confided everything to him. He was furious upon hearing about his parents' actions. As my workplace colleague and my husband's brother, he was well aware of his parents' plans. He told me that his brother Matthew was his only family, and by extension, I was a family member too. Our parents either want to live in that house with you or kick you out to make it their own, he said. He described his parents as socially ambitious, vain, and unscrupulous. This is especially true for my mother-in-law, who, despite portraying herself as an ideal lady in public, is actually self-centered and indifferent to others at her core. The family insights from my brother-in-law carried a significant weight, revealing the true nature of my mother-in-law, which my husband never knew because she was always pretending in front of her eldest son. Given this situation, my brother-in-law advised me to sell the land early to prevent it from falling into their hands. I agreed with his suggestion and decided to proceed with the sale. As much as I cherished the estate left by my grandfather, I didn't want it to become a source of discord between me and my husband. Rather, because it was so important, I didn't want to leave any problems unresolved. Of course, this decision wasn't made impulsively. My husband and I had discussed it beforehand, and he had agreed. Through this process, my husband came to understand the full extent of his parents' actions. I originally wanted to keep it a secret, but I couldn't decide to sell on my own. Still, he understood the feelings I couldn't express and was clearly angry about his parents' actions. I'm sorry I didn't know. If you think this is best, let's quickly sell it before any problems arise. I'm really sorry it had to come to this, considering it was an important house inherited from your grandfather. It's okay. If it leads to such trouble, I'm sure my grandfather would also agree to sell. I decided to sell the land to protect our future as a couple, rather than maintain relations with my parents-in-law. My brother-in-law, who is knowledgeable in real estate, helped us by finding the right buyers. My role was to quickly find a new place to move, complete the move, and act naturally so as not to alert my parents-in-law. The house showed signs of use as we had lived in it, but it was almost like new, and we priced it accordingly. A buyer was found quickly, and the sale went smoothly. The family that arrived earlier are the new owners. Originally, I was supposed to wait for Matthew's return to our new home. It's regrettable that he approved of and was pleased with the sale, but couldn't be here to see it through. The movers were efficiently progressing with their work. My parents-in-law, having been ousted, could only stand by dumbfounded, but such a situation could not continue. The moving company my parents-in-law had hired appeared, clearly confused and seeking an explanation. For the movers, it must have been baffling to encounter an unexpected booking. I never imagined such a thing would happen. You are breaching the contract, the movers pressed my in-laws, but they were at a loss for words and couldn't explain themselves properly. In the end, the household goods had to be taken back, resulting in unexpectedly high additional fees. Finally understanding the full situation, my mother-in-law reached out to me with trembling hands. This is the home of our son's wife, and so it should be our home too, right? Isn't this situation odd? My mother-in-law desperately tried to justify herself and convince me, but I ignored her pleas and left with only my personal belongings. The land already belonged to the new family, and it was no longer mine to claim. My husband's memorial service was completed without further incident. I crossed paths with my parents-in-law, and though they tried to speak, they ended up leaving in haste without saying anything. I no longer felt obliged to maintain a connection with them, and our conversations dwindled. Now, I am living peaceful days as if nothing had happened. I was supposed to start a new life with my husband in a new home, but with his loss, that dream vanished. Although selling the house left me with substantial savings, without my husband, I have no desire to build a new house. I returned to work, reminiscing about the days spent with my husband and trying to rediscover myself to stay positive. On the other hand, my parents-in-law, particularly my mother-in-law, seemed increasingly dissatisfied. I avoided any interaction with them and did not share my new address. The lack of contact with me seemed to amplify her dissatisfaction. Because she always put on airs in front of Matthew and couldn't go to her estranged younger son, she didn't even know where I was. The stress accumulated, and eventually, my mother-in-law lost her mental balance. One night, she scattered gasoline around the vicinity of our former home and attempted arson. Fortunately, a passing neighbor noticed her unusual behavior and immediately stopped her, preventing the situation from escalating. When the police arrived at the scene, they found evidence that she was about to start a fire, including a lighter and old newspapers, leading to her arrest for attempted arson. The new owners of the house, who had encountered her on their moving day, were extremely angry when they learned she was the perpetrator and informed me they were considering legal action. I repeatedly apologized for her horrific actions, but there was nothing I could do about her crime. Ultimately, my mother-in-law's obsessive behavior led to her arrest, and I managed to apologize to the new family, promising to ensure such an incident never happened again. My mother-in-law, having grown up in a privileged environment, believed she could have anything she desired. Unable to cope with the reality that she couldn't have the desired house, her jealousy manifested in a twisted way, ultimately leading her to commit a crime and go to prison. Her arrest led my father-in-law to decide he could no longer endure their constant arguments, prompting him to divorce her and move forward with his life. Even after serving her sentence, my mother-in-law would have no home to return to, all as a result of her actions. Meanwhile, feeling lonely after losing his brother, my brother-in-law continued to encourage me, saying, "Because I have a sister-in-law, I can get through this." Although my relationship with my parents-in-law was severed, I hadn't lost all my family. I pledged to spend peaceful days with my daughter, believing that my husband was watching over us from heaven.